In a previous video, I created a showcase for a custom door prompt, which I created with a UI and a beam. So in this video, I was just going to make a quick tutorial on how I did this. So the first thing you do need is a part with, for this I'm just going to be using this. This part is going to be the door. So we can rename this to door part. And then we also need to anchor it. We're going to make a quick model and put the door part in the model here. And we can rename the model to something like custom door prompt. In the door model, we also need another part which we can set to be at the same position as the door part, so it's in the center of it. And this is going to be where we handle the proximity prompt, so we can rename this to proximity and set the size to be however big you want your UI to be. So for this, I'm just going to set it to about 0.8 studs high and wide. And then because this is where the proximity is, we don't want people to be able to collide with it once the door's open, so we can disable can collide and set its transparency to 1. That way people won't be able to see it, but whatever's in it will be able to be seen. And we do need to add a proximity prompt to it because we're going to be using the proximity prompt service, and we need to rename the proximity prompt to something like door prompt. It's important it isn't the same name as anything else in your game, otherwise the script we're going to be scripting might get confused with a door prompt and something else that's completely different. But in here, the prompt, we're going to need to disable clickable prompt, set the hold duration to however long you want it to be held for, set this to about 1 second, and for the style we need to set it to custom. That way when you go up to the door you won't be able to see the prompt, but you can still interact with it. Next, we do need to add a beam, which is going to be what attaches from the door to the player. So we're going to need to click face camera, and the width we can do about 0.6, which is the same width I used for my showcase. And for the transparency, this is a number sequence. We'll need to set it to 1. We've also got an attachment 0 here, which we're going to need to add an attachment to the part. This is going to be the attachment from the part, and then we're going to set attachment 1 here to the attachment that's in the player. So for attachment 0, we need to click on the value and then click on the attachment we created. That way it should show up as attachment. We next need to add a SurfaceGui, which is going to have what key code you click, and it's going to fill up as you hold down on the proximity prompt. For this, we are going to set it to the front part, so we can rename this to front. And for the face, it should be front, and you should be able to see it highlighted there on the front of the proximity block. We're also going to need to disable clip descendants, and for pixels per stud we can set it to about 200. We're going to need to add a main frame to the SurfaceGui, and we can call this something like main. We're going to need to set the background transparency to 1, and for the size we can set it to be the same size as the block by setting a scale for each axis to 1. In the main frame, we're going to need to add a text label. This is going to be where the key code is shown. Here we can enable text scaled, and for the size of it we can set to 1 on each axis, and for the background transparency that can be set to 1. For the text we can set it to E, and the text color we can set to white, which I'm just going to be using for now, although you can style this however you like. Next, we're going to need to add an object text. With this we can create a new text label and call this object text. We're going to need to set the background transparency to 1, and the size can stay as it is, although you can style it however you like. And I'm going to enable text scaled, and the text color can be the same as the key code as white. For this, I'm just going to put the text as door, although we're also going to change this in the script as well. For the position, I'm going to center it with 0.5 on the x-axis so it stays in the middle, but for the y-axis I want it to be above the box, so I can put about minus 0.5, 0.5, and that should move it above, although I do think that's too far, so about 0.1 should do, yeah, 0.2, and then I'm going to put 0.5 for there, and on the anchor point to make it in the center I'm going to put 0.5 in the x-axis. We're also going to need to add a UI stroke here. This is going to, you can see it highlights the box, so we're just going to add a color. I'm going to set that to white to match the other colors, and the thickness you can set to however you like, but for this I'm going to set it to about 3, yeah. You can see it cuts through the object text, so I'm just going to move the object text a bit higher up. I'm just going to set it to about 0.31. Yeah, now it goes over the UI stroke. Now we've got that done, we do need to change the transparency for each part in here to 1. So for the UI stroke we can just set the transparency to 1. For the key code we can set the text transparency to 1, and for the object text we can set the text transparency to 1. One last thing we do need to add is another frame, which is going to be the frame that fills up the entire box whenever it's held down. So you can rename this to fill. And then for the background transparency, we can keep that as 0, but the size we do need to set to 1 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis. So it should not show up. And then on the anchor point, we're going to set it to 1 on the y-axis. And for the position, we're going to put 1 on the y-axis as well. Now we've got the UI set up, we can just duplicate this and rename it to back. And for the face, we can set that to back as well. That's everything in the proximity part done. So now we're going to focus on the server side of the script. So we just need to add a new script and rename this to proximity prompt. At the top, we're going to define all of the services we're going to be using, so we can define the proximity prompt service. We're also going to be using the tween service, so we can define the tween service. The game get service tween service. The first function we're going to be making is when the prompt is triggered, we want the door to open. So we're going to do this with a simple function called prompt triggered. Through here we're going to pass the prompt, and earlier we renamed the proximity prompt to door prompt. Here we're going to check that the prompt that's triggered is the door prompt. With this we can do if prompt.name equals door prompt. And we're going to continue with the function. That way it knows it's the door prompt and not another prompt that it's going to be interacting with. So once we've got this, we're going to want to disable the door prompt so it can't be triggered while the door's opening and closing. So we can do that with prompt.enabled equals false. Next we need to create tween that's going to move the door. So we can define the door with local door equals prompt.parent.door part, because that's getting the parent of the proximity, and which is door part. Next we're going to make the tween with local tween, and then we're going to create a new tween with tween service create, and then we're going to, the instance we want to tween is the door, and for the tween info I want the door to open for about 2 seconds, so we can set the amount to 2. The property table, we want to change the position with position, and we're going to get the door's C-frame with door.C-frame, and then we're going to multiply that by a factor 3 like this, and then we only want to change the x-axis for now, so we're going to change the x-axis by about 4, so we can just put it as 4, and then for the rest we can just do 0. We're then going to want to play the tween with tween play. Now we're going to want to connect this function. So at the bottom of the script, we're going to do proximity prompt service.prompt triggered, and then we're going to connect the prompt triggered function. Now once the tween has been completed, we want the door to wait about 10 seconds and then close again. So we can do that by making a simple function called local tween completed. Then we're going to do local function, and now in here we're going to want to wait about 10 seconds with task.wait 10, and then we're going to create a new tween called local closing tween, and then we're going to call the tween service and then create a new tween. With the door tween info we can set as the same as the last one, and for the position we can do position equals door.cframe, and then we're going to multiply that by a vector 3. We're going to do the opposite of the vector 3 we did earlier, so it closes, so we're going to do -4 and then 0 and 0. Now we want to play the tween, so we can do that with closing tween play. So now once this tween has finished, the door would have been closed, so we're going to want to enable the prompt again with local function closing tween completed, and then we're going to put in here prompt.enabled equals false, but edit it to prompt.enabled equals true. We then need to connect the closing tween completed with closing tween.completed, and then connect the closing tween completed function. We also need to connect the tween completed with tween.completed, and then connect the tween completed function. One last thing we do need to do is disable requires line of sight, and also anchor the proximity part if you haven't already. So now when we play, it should open. There. So it does take a little second, although it still doesn't open that much, so we can go back into the script and change the vector to something a bit bigger, and then change the closing tween as well. So now when we play, it should open completely, or almost completely. There. So now it opens, then it should close again after about 10 seconds. So that's the server side done. What we're going to need to do now is the client side, which we're going to be doing in the starter player scripts. We're going to make a local script, and we can call this proximity prompt. And at the top, we're going to need to define what we need. So first we need the proximity prompt service. And we're also going to need the tween service again with tween service. And we're also going to need the player service, so we can get the local player. And with the player service, we can do local player equals players.local player. The first function we're going to need to make is when the prompt is shown. That way we can enable the beam and show the UI that we've made previously. So we can do this with function prompt shown, and then we're going to input the prompt, and similar to the server side, we're going to check that it's the proximity prompt in the door. So we can do this with if prompt.name equals door prompt. Then we're going to continue with the function. So the first thing we're going to need to do is define the beam with local beam equals prompt.parent.beam. Earlier I said we needed to change the attachment 1 to be the player's attachment, so we can do that with beam.attachment1 equals local player.character wait for child upper torso. We're going to set a timeout for about 10, and then we're going to get the body front attachment. So that will set the beam's attachment to be in front of the player. So now we've got this, we're going to need to tween the transparency, but because the transparency in the beam is a number sequence, we can't tween it. So we're going to need to add a number value into the beam and call this transparency value. And you can see the value is 0, but we're going to change that to 1 so it matches the transparency value here. So instead of tweening the transparency value in the beam, we're going to tween the value in the number value. So we can do this with local beam tween equals tween service create. Then we're going to create it with the beam dot transparency value. Then we're going to put the tween info about 0.4. And for the property table, we're going to change the value to 0. We're going to play this tween, beam tween, play. And then next we're going to need to check whenever the transparency values change, we want to change the transparency value in the beam. So we're going to make a quick changed function with local function changed, and then we're going to pass in the value. And then in here we're going to do beam dot transparency equals value, number sequence, and then value since it's a number sequence. So we're going to do beam dot transparency value dot changed, and then we're going to connect the change function. So now when we walk up to the prompt, it should attach the beam to the player and then tween the transparency. So we're going to, before we join, we're going to connect the prompt shown with proximity prompt service dot prompt shown, and then we're going to connect the prompt shown. And we also need to create the prompt hidden function with function prompt hidden, and then we're going to do the same as the prompt shown. It's pretty similar to the prompt shown function, so you can just copy that and paste it in here. Apart from, we do need to do the following with local function tween, beam tween completed. Then we're going in here, we're going to paste this beam dot attachment 1, and then we're going to delete the body front attachment and change it to nil. That way the attachment won't be attached to the player anymore. Then we're going to connect this function with beam tween dot completed, and then connect beam tween completed. For the beam tween we want to set the value to 1, that way it's transparent again, and then we need to also connect the prompt hidden function with proximity prompt service dot prompt hidden, and then connect the prompt hidden function. We can also make the tween a bit quicker, that way when you walk away it disappears a bit quicker like that. So now when you play, when you go up to it, it shows up, and when you leave it disappears, and when you hold E it opens. So now that's the beam done, we're going to need to work on the two UIs. By doing that, we can make a for statement to handle both UIs instead of having to define both UIs at the same time. So we can do for IV in I pairs beam prompt dot parent get children, and in here we're going to check if the child is a SurfaceGui with if the colon is a SurfaceGui, then we're going to continue. And because it's prompt shown, we need to enable everything that's in each UI. So we're going to first change the transparency of the UI stroke with local stroke tween equals tween service create. Then we're going to do v dot main UI stroke, and then for the tween info we're going to do the same as the beam with 0.4 seconds, and the property table we would need to change the transparency with transparency equals 0. That way you are going to be able to see it, and then we need to play the stroke tween with play. Next we need to make the key code, so local key code tween equals tween service create v.main.key code. Then we need to do the tween info as the same as the UI stroke with 0.4 seconds. And for the property table, we're going to set the text transparency to be 0. Then we also need to play this with key code tween play. For the same as, we're going to do the same for the object text, so we're just going to do local object tween equals tween service create, then v.main.object text. Then for the tween info we can do the same as the others with 0.4, and for the property table we're going to do the same with text transparency equals 0. Then we need to play this tween as well. Before we carry on, we also need to change the object text to match the text that's in the door prompt. We can do this with v.main.object text, and then .text equals prompt.parent.name. I also misspelled transparency here, so transparency here. So now when I join it should also, yeah, so now the UI shows up, although it doesn't disappear. You can also see the object text is custom door prompt, since that's the name of the door. Next we need to copy this and put it in the prompt hidden part, so we can just paste it under the beam and put it there. But we do need to change we can delete this part since it's being hidden. And then for the transparency we need to change that to 1 and that to 1 and that to 1, and we can also make it match the way the beam tweens out by changing tweeninfo.new equals 2. So now when we go up to it, it shows up and it disappears, and it should be the same on the other side. Yeah. So that's the UI done, and now we need to make the fill part fill up when you hold it. So we're going to make a new function called function prompt hold began, and then we're going to pass in the prompt, and similar to the other ones we're going to do if prompt.name equals door prompt. Then we're going to continue with the function. So first we need to make a tween with local fill tween equals tween service create, and then we're going to put the instance as the fill, so we're going to do local fill equals prompt.parent.fill. Then we can just put fill here. For the tween info we're going to do tweeninfo.new, and for the amount we're going to set as the amount it is for the hold duration, so we can do that automatically with prompt.hold duration. And then for the properties table we're going to need to change the size with size equals udm2.fromScale, and the scale we're going to want to make it fill up completely, so we can do 1 and 1, and then we're going to play the fill tween. However, when the fill tween is cancelled, we want the tween to go back down, so we can make a function in here called the local function prompt hold ended, and then put in the we don't need to put in the prompt, and then we can cancel the fill tween with fill tween cancel, and then we're going to make a new tween called local unfill tween, and then do tween surface create fill tween info can be about 0.1, and the property table we need to change the size to dm to new, and then from scale to the x-axis needs to be 1 and the y scale needs to be 0. Then we can play the unfilled tween with play. We also need to connect the prompt hold ended function with proximity prompt service dot prompt hold ended, and then connect the prompt hold ended function we made. We also need to connect the prompt hold began function at the bottom with proximity prompt service dot prompt button hold began, and then connect prompt hold began. We're also going to need to do a for statement like the other SurfaceGui UIs, so we're just going to need to do for I v in I pairs prompt dot parent get children. Then we're going to check if v is a SurfaceGui UI with is a SurfaceGui. Then we're going to continue with it, and then we're going to put local fill equals v dot main dot fill. Then we can just copy and paste the tweens we made with copy, and we can just paste it down here, and then we can delete that. So now when we play, it should open. There. So it fills up and then it opens once it's filled up. Then if we wait for it to close, we'll be able to test it again. So when you let go, it goes back down, and then if you hold it back up, it goes back again. In the showcase, it also highlighted it, similar to how it highlights the door in Studio. With this, we can just go into the proximity prompt and add a highlight. Then for the adornee, we can set to the door, and you can see it already highlights, but we just want to, I'm just going to style it the way I did it, with setting the fill transparency to 1, and the outline can be white, and the outline transparency I need to set to 1 so you can't see it at first. Then you can delete the adornee there. Then in the proximity prompt in the client side, we're going to want to go to prompt shown, and then here we're going to want to do script dot highlight dot adornee equals prompt dot parent dot door part. Then we're going to need to tween the outline transparency with local outline tween equals tween service create script dot highlight, and then for the tween info we can do 0.4 seconds, and for the property table we can do the outline transparency to be 0. Then we can just play the tween with tween play, and then we can also copy this into the prompt hidden like this, and then we're going to make another function called local function highlight tween completed, and in here we're going to copy the script.highlight.adornee part, and instead of setting it to the door, we're going to set it to nil like the beam attachment, and then we're going to connect this function with outline tween dot completed connect highlight tween completed. Then we can just remove the spaces here, and also set the outline transparency to 1. So you can see the highlight also shows up, and then when we go up to it we can hold E and it opens. So that was the proximity prompt tutorial. If you have any more suggestions for other tutorials you'd like me to make, then I could make another video on how to do it and make sort of like a mini series on different tutorials. But thank you for watching, and if you need help you can message me on Discord. Thanks, bye.